What's up, future shred lords? Welcome back. Death to the Fingers. We're going to be getting into this pentatonic workout here, essentially using groups of 3, groups of 4, groups of 6. But listen, aside from the practice exercises, which are important, and listen, these are more like, you know, examples of how you should be organizing your own practice sessions. Okay, don't worry about essentially what I'm playing exactly, because that actually defeats the purpose of practicing to benefit yourself. Instead, listen to it and be like, okay, groups of 3, groups of 4, using the pentatonic scale. And then come up with your own version where maybe you're only doing a couple strings worth of groups of 3 and you're doing it at half the speed, and then all of a sudden you're doing groups of 4, but you're doing it at double time, right? So whatever crazy sort of arrangement you come up with, it doesn't really matter. The fact that you are actually coming up with an arrangement does, because there requires thought process and commitment and sort of sitting there and mathing it out. There's no better practice session than that. And then, of course, you can just fall back on Old Faithful like you hear in the practice exercises. And the second thing is essentially taking these practice exercises and migrating them over into an improv session. So again, from the improv at the beginning, you see me using them still stoically. You know, I'm not really going crazy changing them around too much because I want it to be obvious that I'm factoring them in there. But I'm trying to be creative with them, right? By mixing and matching and whatnot. So another very important sort of distinction there. And of course, I don't do just the pentatonic scale. I actually start to factor in new flavors. When the chord changes, I'm like, oh, look, that's melodic minor territory. So I jump into B melodic minor. And then from there, I'm like, oh, look, this next note here, I can jump down into the harmonic minor, which allows me to resolve out back to the major modes. So again, you see me exercising the music principles necessary to be like tension, relieve the tension, and then also give myself the out to get back into the major scale so I can either move back to the pentatonic scale or just do 3 notes per string kind of situation. And once you do that over and over and over again, it stops being practice exercises and it's just you playing music. Too many people practice and they don't play. If you don't know the difference between that, it's because you haven't found your voice yet. And that's very important. So don't get lost in the weeds and tunnel vision the whole 9 yards by just practicing the exercise part of it. Instead, take the concepts of these exercises after you get relatively comfortable with them and start to factor them into your jam and your sort of like practice sessions with the band and whatnot so that you can actually use them. Find ways of inserting them and using them. That's the other thing. It's one thing to know this stuff and be able to play it in a practice session, but can you just find ways of actually inserting this into everyday music stuff? If you're playing a cover song, could you use some of these techniques to sort of embellish a part or something like that? Oh, look here, it's perfect time for me to do a really fast run of groups of 6. You know, like a journey kind of situation. And there it is. Okay, so again, it starts up here. Too many people get locked into the practice part of it and they don't see beyond the walls of that prison. Instead, use it as a stepping stone to move into the quasi-improv stuff so that becomes effectively part of your everyday playing. And then when you are practicing music for real, either in a band situation or whatever else, make a concerted effort to be like, use this in some way, shape, or form, whether it's just a few notes or a small part of the sequence or a much more involved one. Or if you're writing solos and stuff for the band, there's another opportunity, of course, to start to do something with a sequence and just start doing that. And I guarantee you that you'll find immediate value because you'll be like, I want to do this more. And then just by mixing and matching this with string skipping, of course, with your standard pentatonic stuff, 3-in-1, well, obviously, I think you get the point. Just with that one scale alone, you become an absolute shred monster. So let's get into these exercises. All right, I had to throw the headphones on there so I could make sure of what exactly it was I played. But in that first one, you can basically hear me starting to experiment with the tempo. I start off with just a standard quarters. I'm like, okay, I can play the scale all the way up and down on time using quarter notes. Then I get into the idea of the swing feel, right, using triplets, okay, or dotted eighths. So that's the next one that you hear there. It's a little bit faster, but it's got more of a swing feel. It's a lot trickier to play too and keep on time. Then of course, the next one is one more step up where I use the 16th notes. It's going a lot faster now. Again, using the sequence of 3. From there, I'm going to jump between now 16ths and dotted eighths. So that's the next stage, is where you start to move between just playing the 16th notes and then playing the dotted eighth notes and then back to 16th and then back to the dotted eighths. So that's the next little sequence. And of course, at the very end, you hear me ascend using 16ths. And then of course, I just do the very thing I was talking about, move into eighths, and then back into the 16ths and then back into the dotted eighths. And you get that weird sort of lilting, cascading feel, if you will. And it's quite tricky. I'm not going to lie. I had to try it a few times to get my brain around it. And that's really what you're shooting for. Now, listen, that's just groups of 3. You got groups of 4. You got groups of 6. Just those ones right there will keep you going for the next 5 years. So, and every position, of course, which is tricky as hell. So the point being here is that you got to start small, methodically. So start by working on the timing and then combining the 2 times together with just one set of the sequences, right? With groups of 3 or groups of 4, whatever, whichever one takes your fancy, right? And then of course, start to branch out from there. Let's get into the next section. In that one there, obviously, once you get good at the systems, 3s, 4s, 5s, 6s, whatever it is, you're going to start combining them together. So again, I try to keep it simple. I didn't actually stack them on top of each other, you know, do like 4s and then do 3s, or 3s and then 4s. Instead, I just did a group of 3 ascend in the one position and then group of 4s coming down in the next position adjacent to it. And that right there is a great way of practicing. Now, listen, at the end there, you can see I kind of go off the rails. And I was like, oh, that alternate picking run there was pretty awesome. But there's all kinds of mistakes that I do in the actual performance and stuff. And that's really what I want to talk about. Listen, you just got to keep going. Nobody starts off being perfect. I make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes, right? It doesn't matter. Some days I can play this perfectly. Other times you turn the camera on and all of a sudden the brain's just like, oh no, you know, red light syndrome or whatever they're calling it these days. But that's a true thing, is you just have to, you know, roll with the punches and think of it like as the ocean smashes into rocks and stuff like that. It just starts to wear down all those sharp edges and eventually becomes smooth and polished. And that's really what you're doing, just repeatedly going over these tasks. But also in the back of your mind being like, I got to take it from this practice realm into like the actual real world realm. Nice. Tried. Failed. But, and when you do, you start to actually get the value out of it. It's no longer just, oh, look, do this to get technically more proficient or become better at alternate picking and stuff. Instead, it's do this because it's a really cool tool to use in your solo, like so many other great guitar players have used in the past, right? So that's really what it is. So after you get done with just one system, messing with the time, and then starting to mess around with stacking them on top of each other, well, you're going to move into pairing two of these systems together. And of course, at the end, if you feel like going off on a tangent and doing a crazy alternate picking shred run, well, you do that too. Mint, next. Groups of 4, groups of 6. Obviously, the big takeaway here is when you're doing groups of 4 and ascending in one position, like the Aeolian or Ionian, it gets awkward very quickly. So by ganging up 2 positions and then practicing the alternate picking, if you will, and then the visualization aspect where you're like, okay, I'm moving from, in this case, Mixolydian to Aeolian in the example. Just seeing those in the string groupings and jumping between them obviously is going to be the practice session in and of itself. And of course, again, we're just upping the ante. So we're going between these groups of 4 now into groups of 6, and I descend. Now you can see me sneak in this string skipping stuff just because I was like, sure, I could factor in groups of 3 or maybe something else, maybe 3 notes per string and whatnot. But in this case, I was like, the minor pentatonic scale and string skipping is pretty friendly. So it made a lot of sense. And I don't think people do the string skipping stuff as much as they probably should. So that's a great way to factor that in there. And of course, gets me to the high E again, where I can now restart the sequence of 6, right? And come all the way down kind of deal. And then, of course, I just go off on another tangent with the improvisation and whatnot. And that's irrelevant. It's just me messing around and having fun. But the point being here is again, you see a technical issue when you start ascending in groups of 4. Not when you're descending. That's relatively straightforward. But once you start ascending, you're like, okay, it's not quite as straightforward anymore. So now you have to put on your thinking cap and basically be like, how do I solve this problem? And the obvious answer would be like, well, I can just do it by putting 2 of these systems together. And that right there, you obviously coming up with that conclusion on your own for the next problem when you're doing something that, we're not doing a lesson on the internet here with. And when you go through that process and basically come up with that solution on your own, that's when you start to become a much better musician. Because now you're actually operating on a level mentally that's actually going to refine all of those necessary skills, the recognition of the chords, like the micromanaging of all of the elements, right? Okay, the rhythm aspect, the harmonic aspect, what solos are you going to play? Or are you doing rhythm stuff with chords and moving between chords and scales and stuff like that when you're doing sort of like little fills or outright solos and rhythm section stuff. So I think you're starting to get the idea. It's like there's about 20 supervisory things going on at the same time. So it's not just about doing the sequences or anything else like that. It's about learning how to factor these sequences in. So yes, there's practice value there no matter what, just doing the sequences, and you should be practicing them. But more importantly is to start to factor the idea of using these sequences, these groupings and stuff, and ganging them together as necessary in your everyday improvisations, where you try to use it as a soloing tool rather than just a practice exercise. I hope this video helped. I appreciate every single one of you. Thanks so much for joining me. Good luck on your practice sessions. Just keep the nose to the grindstone. Use these as guidelines. Be like, how would I do this? How would I do groups of 4 and groups of 6? And there it is. You've taken the first and most important and biggest step in sort of becoming your own great player. Think of it that way, because at the end of the day, you're in competition with no one else, just yourself. So keep it up. You have my respect. We'll see you in the next one.